Hello and welcome to Umbral Dread. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that quietly pull you deeper into the shadows, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body sink into stillness, and allow the noise of the outside world to slowly fade into silence. Tonight, something stirs in the darkness, waiting just beyond the edge of your imagination. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and let yourself drift into the depths of Umbral Dread. Story 1. I could have sworn that door had never existed before. I bought this house a few weeks ago, and I've explored it so many times I could walk the halls in the dark. It's one of those huge old antebellum plantation houses. Wide porches, tall windows, too many rooms, too many turns. The kind of place that looks beautiful in daylight and feels slightly wrong once the sun starts going down. Still, I told myself the uneasy feeling was just the house being old, just my imagination working overtime in a new place. But this hallway wasn't new to me anymore. I knew it. It always had 3 doors. Always. From the first day I toured the house, to the day the paperwork was signed, to the morning I moved in, to when I walked down that hallway half asleep to use the bathroom today. Now it had 4. The new door didn't look freshly installed. It wasn't bright or clean or obviously out of place. That was part of what made my skin prickle. It matched the others too well, like it had been there for decades. The wood was the same aged color. The knob was the same style. The frame even had the same minor chips and wear, as if it had always been part of the house and my mind was the thing that had been wrong. I stood there a long time, staring at it, waiting for my brain to catch up and supply a normal explanation. Maybe I had miscounted before. Maybe one of the doors had been hidden behind a piece of furniture during the tour. Maybe the hallway layout was slightly different than I remembered. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became. This door was new. I opened it. The air inside wasn't cold like a forgotten storage room should be. It was still almost warm, like the room was holding its own temperature separate from the rest of the house. Dust covered everything in that thick, soft way that tells you nobody has been there for a very long time. The dust lay heavy on the chair, on the rug, along the baseboards. There was a wooden chair in the center of the room, and it was wrong in a way I can't explain cleanly. It wasn't just old. It was tall, too tall. The seat sat high enough that you'd almost have to climb into it, like it had been made for someone longer-limbed than a normal person. The legs were thick and plain. No fancy carving, no decoration. It had the simple, practical look of something built for one purpose and nothing else. Beneath it was a rug that might have been blue once. It was hard to tell now. The color had faded until it was more like a memory of blue. The fabric looked thin in places, worn down like it had been used long ago and then abandoned. Dust was everywhere, except for one spot, a clean circle on the wooden floor, perfectly round as if something had been resting there and had recently been moved away. The clean area wasn't just lighter, it looked freshly revealed, like it hadn't had time to gather a new coat of dust. I stared at it, and a thought came to me without asking permission. Something belongs there. I stepped fully into the room, and the space immediately started messing with my eyes. It wasn't a dramatic change. It wasn't like the walls visibly moved. It was more subtle than that, which made it worse. When I looked straight ahead, everything seemed normal enough. But if I tried to take the room in all at once using my peripheral vision, the walls seemed to stretch. The corners didn't stay put. Lines that should have been straight started to bend inward slightly. The room narrowed like a throat tightening, until I blinked and it opened again, suddenly wider than the house should be able to hold. It felt like the room was inhaling and exhaling around me, but only when I wasn't looking directly at it. My breathing changed almost immediately. Not because of dust or cold air. The air didn't feel thin. It felt too still. But each inhale caught halfway, like my lungs weren't getting what they needed. I kept taking deeper breaths, and it kept feeling like there wasn't quite enough. The effort made my chest tighten, and the more I noticed it, the worse it got. I backed out and shut the door. Then I stood in the hallway with my hand still on the knob, listening to the quiet of the house. I waited for my heart to slow down and for the normal part of my mind to step back in and laugh at me. It didn't. I didn't go back for days. I avoided that hallway completely. I stopped using the bathroom down there. If I needed to go, I used the outhouse outside instead. It was inconvenient and ridiculous, but it gave me peace of mind outside at least. The world behaved like the world. When my family came over later that week, I decided I wouldn't mention the door. I told myself there was no reason to plant that seed in their heads. I didn't want to sound like the new homeowner already losing it. I didn't want them to look at my house like it was cursed. The door was still there, of course. The hallway looked normal until your eyes landed on that extra frame, and then the whole place felt slightly off balance. My mother walked past it once, then again the second time she stopped. She reached out and rested her hand on the frame like she recognized the texture of the wood. "Was this always here?" I asked her, trying to keep my voice casual. She frowned at me as if I'd asked whether the ceiling had always been above our heads. Of course it was. Before I could say anything else, she opened it and stepped inside. My stomach dropped. I followed her. The room looked the same, the tall chair, the faded rug, dust everywhere, the clean circle on the floor. Nothing seemed disturbed, and yet it felt more wrong now that someone else was in there with me, like I'd brought a guest into a place that didn't want witnesses. My brother walked in behind us, talking about something, work, traffic, I don't even remember. He was fiddling with his car keys while he spoke, spinning them around his finger the way he always did. Mid-sentence, he stopped near the chair and lowered his hand. He set the keys down, not on the chair, not on the rug, right in the clean circle. He didn't look at his hand while he did it. He didn't pause. He didn't react. It was like he'd placed them down on a normal table without thinking. Nobody said anything. The conversation continued, filling the room with normal sound, and that normal sound felt wrong in there. It was like the room didn't fit it, like the words didn't echo the way they should, like our voices were entering a space that wasn't made for them. I kept staring at the keys. I kept telling myself to speak, to ask him why he did that, to pick them up, to stop whatever was happening. But at some point, I realized I wasn't staring anymore. I don't remember looking away. I don't remember deciding to. I just remember the next moment being different, like a piece of time had been skipped. When everyone moved back into the hallway, I turned and looked at the circle again. The keys were gone. "Where'd you put them?" I asked my brother. He looked at me like I was joking. "Put what?" "Your keys." "Keys?" He frowned. I didn't bring keys. The way he said it wasn't defensive. It was truly confused, like he couldn't imagine why I would ask. I didn't argue because I could already feel how arguing would go. I'd sound crazy. I'd sound like I was accusing him of lying for no reason. And the part of me that was paying attention to the room felt something colder than confusion. It felt a warning. I looked at the floor. The circle looked cleaner than before, like it had been wiped. That night, I half expected to wake up and find the door gone, like a weird trick of the mind that would fade in the morning. It was still there. And the next day, I noticed something that made it worse. The first day I found that room, I had counted my steps across it, because that's what my brain does when it can't make sense of something. It tries to measure it, to put numbers on it, to make it behave. 15 steps from the doorway to the far wall, I remembered clearly. Now, standing inside again, it took 17. I stood there, confused, and the air caught in my lungs again. That half-breath feeling returned, the sense that I couldn't fill my chest no matter how hard I tried. I backed out quickly before I could count again because the thought of it becoming 18 made my throat tighten. At breakfast, nobody mentioned the door. Nobody mentioned my brother's missing keys. They ate, talked, laughed, like they hadn't stepped into a room that shouldn't exist. I went to make tea. While the kettle heated, I heard movement upstairs. Footsteps and voices drifting toward that hallway. My heart started beating harder. I walked toward the stairs, ready to stop them, but I was too late. They were already going, like they were being gently pulled. Different family members drifted toward the door, each stopping at a slightly different point, still talking to each other as if this was just a normal tour of the house. Then my aunt did something that made my stomach twist. Without any announcement, without breaking her sentence, she squatted down and set her phone in a circle. It was so casual, so automatic. I stepped forward, trying to get a clear look, but there were too many bodies in the way. People shifted, blocking my view. The conversation continued. Someone laughed. Someone asked about the backyard. Normal family noise, thick and warm, filling a cold space. When they moved out of the room 10 minutes later and returned to the kitchen, I went straight back in. The circle was empty. I waited until I could catch my aunt alone. She was in the living room, sipping coffee, talking to my mother about something small. I forced myself to stay calm and asked, lightly, like it was a joke, "Why did you leave your phone in that room?" She raised an eyebrow. "Phone?" She gave a small laugh. "I don't use one. You know that." I just stared at her. She blinked at me, and her expression shifted into polite concern, like she wasn't sure if I was feeling okay. "Anything else, dear?" I swallowed. My mouth was dry. "No. Sorry, never mind." I walked out of the room, feeling like the floor had tilted. In the hallway, my own phone was already in my hand. I wasn't even sure when I'd taken it out. My thumb scrolled through my contacts slower than it needed to, like I was afraid of what I'd see if I moved too fast. Her name wasn't there. Not under her first name. Not under her last. Not under the nickname I'd always used. Nothing. I pulled up my call history because I knew, absolutely knew, I had called her the day I first saw that door. I remembered standing in that hallway, phone pressed to my ear, telling her I had bought a place that felt like it was playing tricks on me. I remembered her voice, but the call wasn't there. I stood still for a long time, staring at my screen until it dimmed and went black. Then I went upstairs, each step feeling too loud. The door was still there. Inside the room, the chair had shifted. Not a lot, just enough that it made my skin prickle. It wasn't perfectly centered anymore. It leaned slightly toward the clean circle, like something heavy had tugged it a few inches, and then stopped. The circle wasn't just clean now. The edges looked darker, like the wood around it had been pressed or stained. Like the floor was being worn down in a way that didn't match dust and time. I stepped closer, and the boards felt uneven under my feet, as if the floor dipped toward that spot. Footsteps sounded behind me. I spun around so fast my neck hurt. "I was looking for you," my aunt said from the hallway. For a second, I couldn't speak. My brain tried to reconcile her voice with the empty space where her name had been on my phone. "What for?" I asked. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly as if she'd forgotten what she came to say and was trying to pull the thought back. The pause lasted a fraction too long. Then she smiled. "Oh, nothing important," she said, like that explained everything. She didn't leave right away. She stood in the hallway looking at the door frame, then down the hall, then back again. Her expression was thoughtful, but not quite right. Not worried, more like someone testing their memory. "I've come up here a lot, haven't I?" she asked, almost to herself. My throat tightened. I hesitated, then lied. "No, I don't think so." She nodded slowly, like that answer fit into a pattern she was trying to confirm. "Strange," she murmured, and turned away. I looked back into the room. The chair had shifted again. It faced the circle more directly now. Something in me started to break open. A panic that didn't have a clear shape. I backed away from the doorway and went to my bedroom, moving fast, but trying not to run. I needed proof. I needed something solid I could hold up against whatever was happening. Something that would remind me I wasn't imagining my own life. I found my graduation photo in a drawer. I hadn't looked at it in a long time. It was one of those group photos where everyone is smiling and crowding together, shoulders pressed, trying to fit into the frame. My family was there, my friends, a whole version of my life that felt stable and real. I carried it out into the hallway, not rushing, because part of me was afraid that if I rushed, I'd make it worse. The house felt quieter than it should have with that many people in it, like sound was being absorbed before it could spread. When I reached the door, the room looked unchanged at first. Chair, rug, dust, circle. The circle waited like it had been waiting for me specifically. I stepped inside and placed the graduation photo in the circle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I blinked. The floor was empty. The photo was gone so completely it was like it had never existed. No sound, no movement, no wind, just absence. I stood there staring at the bare wood, frozen in that sick space between disbelief and certainty. Then I backed out and walked downstairs as if I were sleepwalking, my body moving while my mind lagged behind. My father was on the couch watching television. I tried to speak, tried to force words out that would anchor me. "I was just showing you something," I said, because I couldn't think of anything else to say. He glanced over, irritated the way people get when you interrupt a show. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I thought you were with your aunt upstairs." My blood ran cold. I swallowed. "I was just showing you something?" He frowned slightly, like I was making no sense. "Showing me what?" I tried again carefully. "Remember my graduation photo?" He tilted his head. "Graduation?" He looked honestly puzzled. "You haven't had one of those?" Then he turned back to the TV as if the conversation was over. I stared at him. I kept waiting for him to turn back and laugh, to say he was joking, to ask why I looked so pale. He didn't. He kept watching, comfortable, relaxed, like I was some neighbor who had wandered in and asked an odd question. I looked at the wall behind him. There was a photograph I had seen 100 times, my colleagues and me. A work photo. People lined up, arms around shoulders, smiling stiffly like adults do in group shots. Only now it was just my colleagues. The space where I should have been had closed in. The people on either side were pressed closer together, shoulders touching where they hadn't before, like the photo had always been that way, like my absence had been built into the picture from the beginning. I didn't say anything. I went back upstairs. The hallway felt shorter than it should have, like the distance between the stairs and the door had been trimmed down. The door was closer than my memory of it, waiting at the end of the hall like it was pulling the house inward around itself. Inside, the chair sat directly in front of the circle now, perfectly positioned like it had been set for a purpose. And the circle wasn't empty anymore. Something dark sat at its center. Not an object I could name, not a shape that made sense. It was just a presence, a blot, a lump, a piece of wrongness that made my eyes want to slide away. It felt like the circle was being filled, like something was gathering itself there, assembling slowly from whatever had been taken. I stepped closer, and the floor dipped more sharply beneath my feet, as if my weight was being encouraged downward. For a moment, I had the strongest feeling I was interrupting something private, like walking into a room where someone had been waiting in silence. A voice spoke behind me. "Sorry, are you looking for anyone?" I turned. My father stood in the doorway. But he wasn't my father anymore, not in the way that mattered. His face held no recognition, no concern, no confusion about why I was up here. He looked at me the way you look at someone you don't know who has wandered into the wrong part of your home. Polite, neutral, almost kind, like I was a stranger. I opened my mouth to answer. I wanted to say, "Yes, I'm looking for you. I'm looking for my brother. I'm looking for my aunt. I'm looking for proof that I exist." But the words weren't there. What I was going to say slipped away before it reached my tongue, as if it had already been taken. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't wanted to understand since the first time I saw the clean circle on the floor. The room didn't just take objects. It took the space those objects held in the world. It took the space they held in people. And now, standing there with my father looking at me like a polite stranger, I wasn't sure how much space I had left. Story 2. I have one younger sister. I'll call her Lily. She's 3 years younger than me, and we've always been close in that easy, built-in way some siblings are. We fight sometimes, sure, but we also share a lot. We like the same shows, we replay the same songs until our parents complain. We know how to sit in the same room and do our own thing without it feeling awkward. It's always been comfortable. That's why it took me longer than it should have to admit something was wrong. At first, it felt like normal sister stuff. A little annoying, a little creepy, but still normal. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Lily was being Lily. Little sisters copy their older sisters. They steal clothes. They try on your style. They pick up your words. They want to be you for a while, especially when you're older and you seem like you have everything figured out. But this wasn't that. It started about 2.5 weeks ago. I remember because it was a Monday and I had come home from school with that heavy backpack feeling, already stressed because I had an essay due later in the week. I was thinking about how I needed quiet, how I needed to sit down and actually get words on a page, and how I couldn't afford to waste time. When I went upstairs, Lily was on my bed. Normally, that wouldn't be a huge deal. She hangs out in my room sometimes. She says my room feels calmer than hers. Her room has brighter posters and messier shelves. Mine is mostly neutral colors, and I keep things lined up because it helps my brain feel less crowded. Sometimes she lies on my bed and watches videos or reads while I do homework at my desk. Usually I can ignore it. That day I couldn't. I walked in and she didn't even look up at first. She was sitting cross-legged on my comforter, leaning forward like she was really focused on something. The air in my room felt a little warmer than it should have, like someone had been in there a while. I set my bag down, sighed, and went over to her. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "Can you go hang out in your room for a bit? I really need to work." That's when I saw what she was holding, my middle school yearbook. It took me a second to understand why that felt strange. It's not like it was locked away. It was on my bookshelf with the other random books I never touch. Still, it's a weird thing for someone to casually pick up and read like a novel. And Lily wasn't flipping through it the way most people do. She was on one page, staring. Then I noticed what she was wearing, one of my favorite shirts. It was an old, soft one, the kind that somehow stays perfect even after 100 washes. It had been missing that morning. I had actually looked for it because I wanted something comfortable for school. I had checked my closet, my hamper, the back of my chair. Gone. My stomach tightened. "Lily," I said, pointing at the shirt before I could stop myself. "Where did you find that?" She didn't answer. She just smiled. Not a ha-ha, I borrowed it smile. It was small and calm, like she knew something I didn't. Like she was pleased with herself in a way I couldn't understand. She looked back down at the yearbook and turned a page like I wasn't standing there. I asked again, more firmly, "Seriously, where did you get it?" She closed the yearbook without a word, slid off my bed, and walked out of my room. No apology, no excuse. No attitude, just silent, smooth movement down the hallway like she was gliding. I stood there for a second, honestly too confused to follow her right away. When I finally looked down at the yearbook, I saw something that made my skin prickle. The page with my picture had been dog-eared. The crease looked fresh, like someone had folded it hard. I stared at my own middle school photo, the awkward smile, the slightly crooked hair, my name printed underneath. I'd never cared about that picture before, but suddenly I felt exposed, like someone had been staring at me through it. Still, I forced myself to laugh it off. Maybe she was teasing me. Maybe she thought it was funny. Lily is weird sometimes. Middle schoolers are weird all the time. For a few days after that, everything seemed normal again. Lily and I sat on the couch and watched our usual shows. We talked about school, We argued over what music to play in the car. I even caught myself forgetting about the yearbook thing. But then I started noticing my clothes in her room. At first, it was little stuff, a hoodie I hadn't seen in a while, a pair of socks I thought I'd lost, a bracelet I always kept in the top drawer of my dresser. When I asked her about it, she either shrugged or said she didn't know what I meant. If I pushed harder, she smiled that same small smile. Then last week, it got more obvious. One morning, Lily left for school before me, which wasn't common. I was still upstairs getting ready when I heard the front door shut. A minute later, I went to put on my sneakers and realized they were gone. Not just moved, gone. I checked the usual places, under my bed, by the front door, in the closet. I even looked in the laundry room like that made any sense. Nothing. I ended up wearing old shoes that pinched my toes and ruined my whole mood before first period. When I got home that day, Lily was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, doing homework. Her feet were tucked under the chair. I didn't see her shoes, but I saw the corner of my sneaker poking out from under her backpack. I pulled it out without saying anything. It was my sneaker. The same scuff on the side. The same worn-in crease near the toe. "Why do you have my shoes?" I asked. She looked up slowly. "They're not your shoes." "Yes, they are." She held my gaze, then smiled again. "No, they're mine." It wasn't even said like an argument. It was said like a fact. She went back to writing like the conversation was over. That's when my parents started feeling off. Not cruel, not mean, just strangely uninterested. If I complained, they acted like I was making a big deal out of nothing. My mom would say, "You two are always mixing up your stuff," even though we never used to. My dad would barely look up from his phone and mutter, "Just label your things." I had little habits that made my stuff easy to recognize. A pen mark inside the collar of one hoodie, a specific way I'd tie my shoes, a tiny scratch on the back of my phone case. The kind of details you don't think about until someone else starts wearing your life like it belongs to them. Over the past few days, Lily started wearing my clothes constantly. Not occasionally, not borrowed, not mixed by accident. Constantly. My shirts, my shoes, my hair clips, even my perfume once, which was so weird because Lily hates perfume. She says it gives her headaches. But that night, she walked past me in the hallway and I caught the exact scent I wear. When I stopped her and said, "Are you wearing my perfume?" she didn't even blink. "No," she said, and kept walking. The strangest part wasn't even the lying. Lily has always been a bad liar. She has these obvious tells. She gets too loud, or she laughs at the wrong time, or she avoids eye contact. But now, when she denied things, she did it smoothly, calmly, like she believed it, like it was true. Then she started talking like me. I know that sounds silly. People pick up each other's phrases all the time. Friends do it, couples do it, siblings definitely do it. But Lily didn't just copy a couple of sayings. It was like she was studying me, like she had listened to me for years and finally decided to put my voice on. She started using my tone, my timing, the way I pause before making a point. The little sarcastic "sure" I say when I'm annoyed. Even the way I clear my throat when I'm nervous. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it because once you notice something, you start hearing it everywhere. But then it got worse. The other day, she was talking at dinner and she used the word desultory. I almost dropped my fork. It's not even a common word. I only knew it because I had just learned it from my SAT practice book. I was proud of myself for remembering it. I had even used it in a sentence in my head that morning, just to make sure it stuck. And my SAT book doesn't live at home. I keep it in my locker so I can use it during homeroom without carrying it back and forth. Lily is in middle school. She has no reason to know SAT words like that. I stared at her and said, "What did you just say?" She looked at me like I was the one being weird. "Desultory," she repeated. My dad actually seemed impressed. "Nice word," he said. And then he started asking her about her classes like she was suddenly older, like she had suddenly turned into someone worth listening to. Then she said misanthropic, That one hit me even harder because I had literally practiced it the night before. It had felt awkward in my mouth, like I was trying to wear shoes that didn't fit. And Lily just said it easily, like it belonged to her. That night, I went to my room and locked the door. I sat on my bed and stared at my closet like my clothes might crawl out on their own. I tried to be logical. I tried to come up with reasons. Lily could have heard the words online. She could have read them somewhere. She could be messing with me. But none of those reasons explained the way she said them. Not like a kid showing off. Like someone remembering. 2 days ago, I went to wake her up for school. Our mornings are usually the same. I knock on her door. She groans. I tell her Mom will yell if she's late. Sometimes she throws a pillow at me. Sometimes she tells me to go away. It's normal. This time, I opened her door and froze. Lily was asleep on her side, her face half buried in her pillow, and on the side of her nose, right where mine is, was a freckle. A small one, but clear. Lily has never had freckles, not even faint ones. Her skin has always been smooth, one even tone. I'm the one with freckles. Not a lot, but enough that you can map them if you stare long enough. When I was younger, I hated them. Then I got used to them. Now I barely notice them unless someone points them out. Seeing one on Lily's face felt like seeing my handwriting in a stranger's notebook. I leaned closer and tried to rub it off, thinking maybe it was dirt or marker. My fingers were careful at first, then more rough when it didn't move. It didn't come off. Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at me, half asleep, and smiled that same small smile. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice soft. "You have something on your face," I said, but my voice sounded wrong. Thin, like I was lying. She sat up, stretched, and walked into the bathroom without another word. All day at school, my mind kept drifting back to that freckle. When I got home, Lily was downstairs. She looked normal from far away, but when she came close, I saw more freckles, not randomly scattered freckles either. They were in the exact same places as mine. One near her cheekbone, one closer to her jaw, a tiny cluster on the bridge of her nose. It was like someone had traced my face onto hers. I ran to my room and looked in the mirror. My freckles looked lighter. Not gone yet, but faded like a photo left too long in the sun. That night, I barely ate dinner. I kept staring at Lily, trying to catch her doing something, anything, that would prove this was some kind of prank. But she acted normal, too normal. She laughed at a joke my dad made. She asked my mom about a recipe. She chewed and swallowed and talked like she belonged at the table. The worst part was her eyes. Lily's eyes have always been blue, very blue. Bright enough that people comment on them. My eyes are greenish-brown, that muddy hazel color that changes depending on the light. I've always been slightly jealous of her eyes, just because they're so clear. But at dinner, when Lily looked up, her eyes didn't look blue. They looked green. A light green I had never seen on her. Not hazel, not a trick of the light. Green. I stared so hard she finally noticed. "What?" she asked, amused. "Your eyes," I said before I could stop myself. She blinked slowly. "What about them?" "They look different." She shrugged. "They're my eyes." My mom glanced over, annoyed. "Stop staring at your sister. It's rude." I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "That's not my sister." But I didn't, because how do you say that at a dinner table without sounding insane? I also started thinking she was getting taller. At first, I thought maybe it was just posture, or maybe I was tired. But I kept catching moments where she seemed closer to my height than she used to be. When we stood near each other in the hallway mirror, the difference didn't look as big. When she hugged Mom, her head seemed higher on Mom's shoulder than usual. Yesterday, I saw Lily walking home from school before I got out of the car. I had stayed late for a club meeting, so my mom picked me up. We turned onto our street, and there Lily was, backpack on, walking like she had all the time in the world. One of our neighbors was out front watering plants. She waved when she saw Lily. "Hi," she called. I sat up straight. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. Lily turned and waved back. She smiled at the neighbor and said hi, friendly and calm, like it was the most normal thing in the world to be called my name. My mom didn't react. She just drove past like nothing had happened. When we got home, I found Lily in the living room and demanded, "Why did Mrs. Henson call you by my name?" Lily looked up from the TV. She didn't. Yes, she did. I heard her. Lily tilted her head. "No, you didn't." It was so flat, so confident that for a second my own memory wobbled. Like maybe I had imagined it. Like maybe I was the problem. But I hadn't imagined it. I knew what I heard, and her eyes were green. I followed her into the kitchen while she started dinner, my voice getting louder as she kept brushing me off. "Mom, Lily's eyes are changing," I said. "She's wearing my clothes. She's taking my stuff. People are calling her by my name." My mom sighed like I was complaining about chores. "Honey, Lily's eyes have always been that color." "No," I said, feeling desperate. "They were blue." My mom didn't even look at me. "They're green." I ran upstairs and grabbed my phone. I pulled up old photos, birthday pictures, family vacations, random selfies. In every single one, Lily's eyes were bright blue. I zoomed in until the image got grainy and pixelated just to prove it to myself. I shoved the phone in my mom's face. She stared at the screen for a second, frowning. Then her expression went blank and confused, like she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. "Why are you showing me this right now?" she asked, like I had handed her a photo of a stranger. Because her eyes were blue, I said, "Look." My mom blinked a few times. "I have to make dinner," she said, and turned away. A few minutes later, my dad came home. The normal sounds filled the house, keys, shoes, the low rumble of his voice. I thought maybe he would listen. He's usually the logical one. At dinner, my dad looked right at Lily and called her by my name. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stumble. He said it naturally, like it had always been true. Lily smiled and answered him. Then, like it was the most normal thing in the world, she said misanthropic again, right there at the table. My dad laughed and started talking to her about the SAT. He asked her what kind of score she wanted, what practice tests she'd tried, what words she'd learned. I was sitting right there. I tried to interrupt. "Dad, she's in middle school," I said. "She doesn't." But my dad's eyes slid right past me, not in a rude way, more like he didn't register that I had spoken, like the sound came from somewhere else. It's hard to explain how terrifying it is to speak and not be heard when you know the people in front of you can hear everything else just fine. I pushed my chair back so hard it scraped the floor. My mom flinched, annoyed, and told me to stop being dramatic. Lily didn't even look at me. She just kept eating, calm and sure, like she was settling into her place. That night I went to the bathroom and stared at my face. My freckles were almost completely gone. The few that remained looked like they were underwater. Faint and far away, my eyes looked lighter, not the same muddy hazel they'd always been. Lighter, washed out, and my skin looked pale in a way that didn't feel like normal winter paleness. It looked like the color was being drained from me, like I was losing something I didn't know how to hold on to. I pressed my fingers into my cheek and watched the skin turn white under the pressure. When I let go, the color came back slowly, too slowly. I slept badly. I kept dreaming that I was standing in front of a mirror, but my reflection was a step behind me, smiling. This morning, I woke up feeling exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. My limbs felt heavy, and when I sat up, my head swam. The air in my room felt too thin. My throat felt dry. I went to get dressed, and my stomach dropped. My clothes were gone. Not just the shirt I had laid out, not just a missing hoodie. I mean, my closet looked wrong, like someone had reached in and scooped out the pieces of my life. Hangers were empty. My favorite jeans weren't there. My workout leggings weren't there. My sneakers weren't by the door where I always leave them. I tore through drawers. I pulled things out, Threw them on the floor, checked under my bed like the clothes might be hiding there. Nothing. I ended up taking something from my mom's closet when she wasn't looking. It didn't fit quite right. It smelled like her laundry soap and her perfume. I wore sandals because I couldn't find any of my shoes. I kept telling myself to breathe, to get through the day, to focus on school, to pretend I was normal until I could figure out what was happening. But the hallways at school felt different. Too loud, too bright. Like everything was tilted slightly off. On the way to math class, I saw a girl ahead of me. At first, I barely registered her. Just another student in the crowd. But then something caught my eye. The shirt she was wearing. My shirt, the one I couldn't find this morning. Then I saw her shoes. My shoes. My sneakers. With the same scuff, the same crease, the same way the laces sat because I tie them a certain way and they always end up uneven. My heartbeat started pounding so hard it made my ears ring. The girl's hair was brown, the same shade as mine. When she turned her head slightly to laugh at something, I saw freckles across her face. My freckles. My friend leaned toward her, talking comfortably like this was someone she'd known forever. I tried to speed up, to get close enough to see the girl's face clearly. My legs felt weak, like I was moving through wet cement. The hallway swayed. Students bumped into me and didn't apologize. I heard someone say "excuse me" like it was far away. The girl turned more, and for one clear second I saw her profile. It was Lily. But it wasn't Lily the way I remembered her. Her face looked like mine. Not completely, not like an identical twin, but close enough that my brain struggled to hold the difference. Her eyes were green. Her skin tone matched mine. Her expression was familiar in a way that made me want to gag. My friend said something, and the girl, Lily, smiled. That smile wasn't the messy, childish Lily smile. It was my smile. I stopped walking. The crowd flowed around me like water around a rock. I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing and the pounding in my head. My hands went cold. My mouth tasted like metal. I turned and walked quickly into the nearest bathroom before anyone could see my face. Now I'm hiding in a stall, sitting on the closed toilet lid because my legs don't feel like they can hold me up. I'm trying not to pass out. The fluorescent lights above me buzz and flicker. And every time they flicker, I feel like the world flickers too. Like I'm here and not here, like I'm being erased one small piece at a time. My skin looks even paler than it did last night. My hands are shaking. Earlier in English class, my pencil shook so badly that my writing looked like a stranger's. The teacher asked if I was okay. She told me I looked sick and that I should go to the nurse. I nodded, I left the room, and instead of going to the nurse, I came here. Because what is a nurse going to do? Give me water? Call my mom? Tell me I'm stressed? My mom won't understand, my dad won't hear me, my friends are already walking next to someone wearing my clothes and my face. I keep thinking about that yearbook, the dog-eared page. Lily sitting on my bed, staring at my picture like she was studying it, like she was learning where to begin. And the worst thought, the one that keeps creeping back in even when I try to push it away, is this. Maybe Lily isn't copying me. Maybe she's replacing me. Maybe she's taking the pieces one by one, my clothes, my words, my freckles, my eyes, my name. And everyone around us is letting it happen because somehow they can't see the change. Or they can, and they don't care. Or their memories are being changed too, smoothed over like fingerprints wiped clean. I don't know what I'm supposed to do when I go home today. I don't know what I'm supposed to say when my parents look past me and talk to her like she's me. I'm scared of falling asleep because I'm starting to feel like sleep is where she gets in. Like every night, when I close my eyes, something shifts. Something is traded. I'm scared that one day I'll wake up and there will be nothing left to wake up as. And Lily will open her green eyes, stretch in my bed, walk downstairs wearing my clothes, and answer to my name like she's always been the only one. Story 3. Since I was young, I'd belonged to a loose circle of people who met once a year along a stretch of wooded rivers. We didn't have a formal name, and we didn't act like a normal club. There were no membership lists, no posts online, no schedules mailed out. You either knew about it because you'd grown up around the same places and people, or you didn't know at all. We all carried the same kind of memories. The same schools, the same back roads, the same small towns where everyone seemed to recognize your face even if they didn't remember your name. Some of us had hunted these woods with our parents. Some had fished the river as kids. Some had gotten into trouble here and learned early that the trees could hide you if you respected them. Every year, right around the equinox, we returned to the river to mark the turn of the season. It wasn't religious in any clean, church-like way. It wasn't science either, even though some of us liked to pretend it was. It was tradition, and tradition has its own kind of power. The day and night balanced each other, and we met because our parents had met, and their parents before them, and because once you've done something your whole life, it feels dangerous not to do it. By custom, the week belonged to freedom. We came out there to be simple again, to forget regular life and act like the world was smaller than it really is. It was the kind of freedom you can't explain without sounding either childish or guilty. People drank, people paired off and disappeared into the trees. People did things they would never do in town because in town there are rules and eyes and consequences. In the woods, you could pretend you were only an animal with needs. We didn't spend the whole time together like a normal group camping trip. We crossed paths, sure. You'd pass someone near the river and nod, trade a quick word, then keep moving. But a lot of the time, people wandered alone, following whatever they'd come there to follow. Some came for sex, some came to fight, some came to hunt, some came because something in them got restless around the equinox, like a dog that knows there's a storm coming. No one asked too many questions. That was part of the deal. This year, I arrived late. It wasn't supposed to happen. I'd planned to leave earlier in the day, but work ran long and I'd told myself I'd just drive up after dark. It wasn't far, just a few hours through hills that got steeper the closer you got to the river. I'd done the route so many times I could have driven it half asleep. By the time I hit the last stretch, night had already settled in, heavy and cold. The road narrowed and the trees closed over it like a tunnel. My headlights caught trunks and branches and the occasional flash of an animal's eyes far back in the brush. I assumed the others had already gathered somewhere deeper along the river, beyond the old trailheads and the usual pull-offs. Usually by this point in the night, you'd see at least one campfire in the distance, an orange pulse between the trees, or you'd smell smoke and hear laughter carried faintly across the water. But the roads were strangely empty. I passed a few locals walking along the shoulder. They didn't wave. They didn't look at my car the way people normally do when a stranger drives through their area at night. They seemed unfocused, almost sleepy, their heads turning slowly as if they were following something I couldn't see. Their eyes tracked the air. Their faces had that blank, listening look people get when they hear a sound they can't locate. I rolled my window down once just to check if something was going on. Maybe there was a festival or a game, some reason people were out. All I heard was wind and the faint rush of water somewhere below the road. No music, no distant voices, nothing that explained the way those people stared into the darkness like the dark was talking back. I stopped in town for supplies even though I hated doing it. The place was small, the kind of town that exists because a highway happens to cut through it. A couple of stores stayed open late because travelers needed gas and coffee. The lights were too bright against the night, and the parking lots felt exposed. The people inside weren't friendly. That alone would have been normal in some places, but this was different. Nobody gave me that casual, small-town suspicion. It was more like they were tired of being human. The clerk looked through me while ringing me up, eyes dull, as if he was saving his attention for something more important. A woman near the back aisle kept rubbing her arms like she was cold, even though the store was warm. No one made eye contact for more than a second. Outside, the town looked sick. There were panhandlers in numbers that didn't fit a place this small, lined up near the gas station and the little market like they'd been dropped there. Stray animals lingered under streetlights, thin dogs with ribs like finger bones, cats with half-healed wounds, all of them watching cars with the careful patience of hunger. Children stood near the edges of the lots, too close to the street, staring at nothing. Their faces looked drawn and desperate, like they hadn't slept properly in weeks. Their parents didn't pull them back or talk to them. The adults wore expressions that made my skin crawl, something between disgust and exhaustion, like they hated everyone around them and were forced to keep living anyway. The whole place gave off a feeling like rot under clean paint. I wasted no more time there. I loaded my supplies and drove out fast, eager to trade the harsh lights of town for the dark comfort of the trees. Whatever weird mood lived in that place, I didn't want it clinging to me. When I reached the area we usually used, I expected to see signs right away. At the very least, I expected the white ribbons. We always marked trees with white ribbons. It wasn't for navigation, not really. We knew the trails. It was a sign, a way of acknowledging the woods. Some people said it was a gesture of respect. Others said it was so the woods would know we were there on purpose. Either way, the ribbons were part of it. You tied one, you moved on. But when I arrived, there was no campfire glow, no smoke, no voices, no movement, only darkness packed tight between the trunks. I parked, stepped out, and stood still for a while, letting my eyes adjust. The air was wrong. Not wrong in a simple weather way, like a storm coming. Wrong like a place that had been abandoned suddenly, as if something had happened and the land hadn't recovered. Usually this area felt alive. There were always sounds, insects, frogs, distant birds, the river itself. That night the quiet had weight. I walked deeper, scanning for any sign of our usual offerings. Small bundles, carved marks, bits of string or bone left in places that mattered to us. I found almost nothing. A ribbon here and there, yes, but it looked old, soaked and frayed, not fresh. Some lay on the ground like litter, as if someone had ripped them down and thrown them away. The land itself felt neglected, and beyond that it felt distressed, like it had been waiting and waiting, and the waiting had turned sour. I told myself maybe everyone had moved farther along the river. Maybe they'd found a better spot. Maybe I was just too late and they'd all wandered off into the woods, like they always did. So I started searching. I walked the trails I knew, checking the clearings where people liked to camp. I listened for laughter, for the crack of branches under someone else's boots, for the low murmur of people talking close to a fire. I found nothing. No tents. No glow. No footprints that looked recent. After a while, my confidence faded into irritation, and then into something more uneasy. I told myself not to be dramatic. There were plenty of reasons a group might not be obvious. Maybe they were being careful this year. Maybe something happened in town that made them stay hidden. Still, the emptiness was hard to swallow. Eventually, I picked a spot and set up my own camp. If I kept moving all night, I'd only get lost and make myself jumpy. Better to sleep, wake at first light, and look again. I slept, or tried to. The wind kept scraping through bare branches. The trees were still in that winter stage where they're all bone and no softness, and when they move, they sound like old joints. The cold had teeth. It threatened hail, or at least that kind of icy drizzle that soaks into your clothes and makes you feel dirty inside your own skin. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened. Once I thought I heard a faint droning. It slipped through the wind like a low note from far away. I held my breath, trying to catch it again, but it vanished before I could be sure it had been real. For a while, I convinced myself it was just the wind moving through a hollow or over a rock face. When I got up to use the bathroom, I saw dead animals along the trail. Not one or two, not normal roadkill dragged into the woods by something else. They lay in places that felt deliberate. A rabbit near a stump, a squirrel beside the path, something larger farther off, half hidden in weeds, its shape wrong in the moonlight. There were no songbirds in the branches, no chatter, no sudden flutter when I moved. The smell of mushrooms rose from the earth, thick and damp, like the ground was breathing something sweet and spoiled. The river didn't look right either. Usually it ran clear enough that you could pick out the shape of rocks under the surface. There were always promising pools, places you could imagine fish wading. This time the pools looked thick, greenish, layered with algae blooms that moved like skin. Everything about the place said, not healthy. I told myself I'd find someone in the morning. I told myself I'd laugh at this later. I crawled back into my tent and tried to sleep through the discomfort. That's when the unearthly noise began. I was still in my sleeping bag when it hit, and it wasn't the kind of sound you can ignore. My eyes snapped open. I lay still, listening, waiting to see if it would stop. It didn't. It was horrifying, and that sounds dramatic, but that's the only word that fits. It held the harmony of a ghostly choir, except the voices weren't clean or human. It also had the low groaning of a dairy herd, those long, unhappy moans you hear from cattle when something's wrong. Under that was a sharp hiss, like steel being plunged into cold water, that angry shh sound that makes you flinch. It didn't come from one direction. It seemed to come from everywhere, and from inside the air itself. I couldn't tell how far away it was. I couldn't tell if it was moving or if the woods were carrying it around me. I forced myself to sit up, heart pounding hard enough to make me dizzy. I pulled on warmer clothes with shaking hands and crawled toward the open mouth of the tent. I stared out into the black trees around my campsite, trying to pick out anything. A person, a light, a shape. Nothing moved. The sound continued anyway, like a song that didn't need a singer. I armed myself. I had a knife and a small hatchet. I held them because it made me feel less helpless, even though I knew that if something truly unnatural wanted me, metal wouldn't matter. My camp was in the center of a round meadow, a clearing created by long-ago logging. In daylight, it looked almost cheerful, finger-painted in wildflowers, yellow, purple, white, depending on the season. But at night, it felt exposed, like standing in an eye. My tent sat in the middle with a clear view in all directions. Normally, I love that setup. It makes you feel safe. You can see what's coming. That night, it made me feel like a target. At first, the wailing floated, directionless. Then it sharpened, like the sound had found its place. It rang somewhere in the hills to the south, beyond the meadow. I moved toward the old trail, staying low, keeping myself inside the darker edges of the clearing where the grass was taller. The sky was shifting toward pre-dawn, that bruised blue-purple that shows up before the sun commits to rising. Something was moving in that direction. Two forces were moving toward each other, and I felt caught between them without knowing what either one was. I crouched in tall grass and weeds, the kind of plants that grow thick at the edges of clearings, and I watched the hillside. A shape appeared. At first, I thought it was a person, but the way it moved wasn't right. It shambled, not like someone injured, but like someone who didn't use their body the way a body is supposed to be used. The figure was hunched. Its cloak looked soaked, clinging and heavy. A shawl hung over it, and metallic charms were sewn into the fabric, little bits that caught the moonlight and flashed as it moved. On its back was a drum. I watched the drum bounce with each step, and I realized it wasn't being played by hands. It was rigged up with some kind of string system so that movement itself made it sound. Every step produced a dull beat. Strapped against the figure was another instrument, one I'd only seen in old pictures and museums, a hurdy-gurdy, a strange wooden thing with strings that are rubbed by a crank. It shouldn't have been making noise on its own, but it was. Its resin-coated strings hissed and droned without end, like an insect the size of a machine. The figure looked ancient, not just old in an age sense, old in a way that made it feel out of place in the modern world, like it had stepped out of a story that was never meant to be true. Then the animals appeared. A dark storm of wings gathered in the trees overhead. Birds massed together, not singing, just collecting, fluttering, and shifting in nervous waves. Below them, raccoons moved through the brush in a loose line. White-tailed deer followed, heads low, stepping carefully but without fear. More animals joined from the shadows, all moving toward the same place. Songbirds went ahead of the figure in a thin scattering like they were guiding it. The hunched woman, because the shape felt like a woman even from a distance, walked with purpose toward a hollow in the hillside. It looked like a wound in the earth, a dark opening where the ground had collapsed or been carved away. I'd never noticed it before, and I had been coming to these woods for years. It should have been obvious if it was natural. It didn't feel natural. The music drove the animals onward. I watched, stunned, as they reached the edge and stepped into the hollow without hesitation, not slipping, not falling, walking into it like it was a doorway. The woman kept grinding that endless tune, and with her free hand she beckoned to others. The thickets shook as more animals appeared and joined the line. The air smelled stronger now. Mushrooms, damp soil, something sour beneath it. I moved closer without thinking. It was like the sound had hooked something behind my ribs and pulled. As I crept along the trail, I started seeing signs that made my stomach drop. A hiking pack lay abandoned in the grass, unzipped clean like it had been set down carefully and then forgotten. Beside it was a broken whiskey bottle, glass scattered like ice. The sight was so normal, so human, that it felt wrong in this silent place. It was a trace of our gathering, the first real proof that I wasn't alone out here. White ribbons lay scattered nearby, not tied neatly on branches, but tossed down like trash. So the others had come. And something had happened to them. The woman moved along the mouth of the hollow, the drum beating and the hurdy-gurdy hissing, and each note seemed to push outward into the woods behind her. The sound rose and fell with intention, like it was calling and directing. As she played, the air itself seemed to bend. The woods felt warped, like the space between trees had become deeper than it should be. Then, in the middle of all that noise, I forgot myself. That's the only way I can explain it. One moment I was crouched, watching, heart racing. The next moment it felt like my mind slid sideways, like I stopped being fully present in my own body. And then the sound stopped. The sudden silence was so complete it made me nauseous. It was like someone had sucked all the air out of the world. My stomach rolled. I swallowed hard, trying not to gag. In the silence, something began to gather, all around me in directions I couldn't see. Branches cracked like gunfire. Stones tumbled down slopes. Something big moved through brush deeper in the forest, and the ground carried a dull, rushing pressure like a distant herd. The stampede was coming. With the first edge of dawn bleeding into the sky, I watched the trees themselves begin to move. At least that's what it looked like at first. The spaces between trunks shifted. Shadows poured forward. Shapes emerged. They were pale, and they rushed in a way that made my skin crawl. Their motion was repellent, like watching a video played at the wrong speed. Like animals whose joints bent the wrong way. Like bodies built from an almost correct idea of a body. Grass flattened in long, sweeping lines as they passed. The ground shook gently, not like a single heavy creature, but like many things moving, as one. The herd had no fixed shape. Their forms shifted constantly. Sometimes they appeared only as ripples and flashes of shadow. Sometimes they looked like molten glass flowing and bending as if they didn't have bones at all. In one instant, I saw something like a breaking wave full of heads and limbs. In another instant, it looked like a herd of black shining oil, separate bodies melting together as they ran. As they got closer to the clearing, they shimmered like heat mirages, like flames you can't touch. And then I heard screaming mixed among them, real human screaming that turned my blood cold. For a moment, the rising light hit them just right. Faces appeared, not clearly, not for long, but long enough. I recognized one, then another. People I had known my whole life. People I had grown up with in those towns and schools that connected us. People who should have been around campfires laughing and drinking and doing what we always did. Except now their bodies were twisted, their limbs bent wrong. Their movement was half animal, half something else. Their mouths opened in shapes that didn't match the sounds coming out. Their voices were caught inside that terrible chorus, dragged into it like threads. The old woman had begun playing again. The drumbeat returned, the hurdy-gurdy shrieked through the cold morning air, and the herd responded like a single thing being steered. She directed them past me. That part haunts me most, because I was standing there close enough to see the shifting details, close enough to smell wet fabric and earth and sweat, and none of it touched me. The torrent of shapes rushed by and around me, and I stood undisturbed, as if I didn't exist, or as if I belonged to her, not to them. I saw men and women being driven toward the chasm. I saw their terror. I saw them try to resist and fail. Some looked like they wanted to stop, to turn, to run, but the sound kept them moving. The music didn't just guide their feet, it seemed to guide their will. One by one, the shapes hurled themselves into the hollow. Not all at once, not like a chaotic fall. Like obedience, like completion. The dark opening swallowed them. Every time one vanished, the screaming thinned slightly, like a choir losing members. The woman moved along the rim of the pit, her soaked shawl hiding her face. But I felt her eyes anyway. I felt them find me the way a hand finds your throat in the dark. Then the last of the herd disappeared into the chasm, and the forest went still. Not normal still, still like something holding its breath. Shining eyes watched mine from beneath her dripping shawl. I couldn't see her features, but I knew she was looking straight at me. The distance between us didn't matter. Her gaze held me like a hook. Though we stood far apart, I heard her voice clearly, as if she whispered directly into my ear. "You came late." The words struck like a sentence. My body moved before my mind caught up. I backed away, slow at first, then faster. I didn't turn my back on her until I had to. The moment I did, panic spilled through me and I ran. I crashed through brush, tore my hands on thorns, slipped on wet leaves. I didn't stop to think about direction. I didn't stop to listen for the music again. I only wanted distance between myself and that hollow in the hillside. Behind me, the dreadful instrument sounded again. The hurdy-gurdy's drone rose and fell. The drum beat returned, soft at first, then steadier. The song faded slowly among the trees as I kept running, and even when I couldn't hear it anymore, I felt it in my teeth like a vibration that refused to leave. I didn't follow it that morning. I didn't go looking for the abandoned packs or the scattered ribbons. I didn't call out names. I didn't try to convince myself I could help anyone. I knew, in a cold and certain way, that whatever I had seen was not a situation you argue with. I left. I don't remember packing my tent. I don't remember folding anything neatly. I just remember getting back to my car with shaking hands, fumbling my keys and starting the engine like it might save me. The drive out felt longer than it should have. The trees seemed to lean closer to the road. Every time the wind moved through them, I thought I heard that choir again. When I passed the edge of town, I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. The faces I'd seen earlier, unfocused locals, hollow-eyed kids, felt like part of the same sickness now, like the whole region had been tuned to the same note, and I had been foolish to drive into it. After I got home, I tried to tell myself it had been a nightmare, that I'd been half asleep, disoriented, spooked by the dead animals and the silence, that my brain had filled in the gaps. But I remembered faces, real faces, names attached to them, people whose parents had known my parents. I checked my phone. No messages from the usual people. No jokes about me being late. No "where are you" texts. Nothing. I told myself maybe they didn't have service out there. Then I tried looking them up online. Social media pages that had once been active were suddenly quiet, as if time had simply stopped. A few accounts were gone entirely, like they'd never existed. That should have been impossible. It wasn't. Now I understand something that I didn't want to understand when I was younger. Our gathering was never just about freedom. That was the story we told ourselves because it was easier. It was a mask we wore so we could keep coming back without admitting why. The equinox wasn't just a date on a calendar for us. It was a schedule, a turning, a taking. And this year I arrived late, which is the only reason I'm still here to write this. I wasn't part of the first wave. I wasn't already deep in the woods when the song began. I don't know what would have happened if I'd been on time. I don't know if I would have recognized the danger soon enough to run. I don't know if I would have heard the music and walked calmly into that dark opening like the animals did, like the others did. All I know is the woman's voice in my ear, clear as breath. You came late. I keep thinking about what that implies. That there was a time when coming late mattered. That there's a pattern. That I wasn't spared out of kindness, but because rules are rules, and even monsters follow rules when the rules are older than we are. Winter will end. It always does. The days will lengthen, the ground will soften, the buds will return to the trees as if nothing happened. And when winter gives way to spring, I will be in the forest again. Not because I want to celebrate, not because I want to forget myself for a week among the trees, because the equinox is coming, and I understand now what it really is. A culling, and this time I won't come late. Story 4. For years, nobody ever believed a single word I said. I have spent more time than I can properly count locked away in these quiet, sterile rooms, surrounded by people who either pity me or pretend I do not exist. Even the other patients, the ones who talk to the walls or whisper to shadows that are not there, never took my story seriously. As the seasons changed outside the high windows and the calendar pages turned, I sometimes began to wonder if they were right. Maybe I really had lost my mind. Maybe the things I remembered were just fragments of a fever dream stitched together by stress and exhaustion. The thought alone used to send me into uncontrollable fits of laughter. I would collapse onto the cold floor, shaking and gasping for air, laughing until my ribs ached and my throat burned. It was never really laughter born from joy. It was the sound of a broken mind trying to process something too heavy for words. Of course, that only convinced the doctors and nurses that I was exactly what they said I was. Unstable, dangerous, a patient who needed more medication and less freedom. They never saw the truth. They only saw a broken man who had crossed a line he could not come back from. Before they put me in this place, I spent my life studying plants. I was a botanist who focused on the dense, untamed rainforests of the Amazon. Every year, scientists and researchers find hundreds of new species hidden beneath the canopy, waiting to be documented and understood. For people like me, that region is nothing short of a living library. It holds some of the most extraordinary vegetation on Earth, from massive parasitic blooms to delicate orchids that cling to ancient trees. So when I received an official invitation to join a week-long expedition into the deepest parts of the Amazon, I felt a rush of excitement I had not experienced in years. It was the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime. I traveled with a team of 7 researchers. On paper, our mission was straightforward. We were supposed to survey the local tree species, assess the health of endangered plant populations, and document any unusual flora we encountered. We had permits, equipment, and a clear schedule. But beneath all the official paperwork and scientific goals, every single one of us knew why we were really there. We were hunting for something called the blue moon. History records only 3 confirmed sightings of that flower. Nobody could agree on what it actually looked like. Some described it as a rare blue orchid. Others swore it was a glowing blue rose. The only consistent detail was its connection to a small, isolated group known as the Baytrek tribe. Unlike other indigenous communities in the region, the Baytrek people used this flower in a ritual dedicated to a figure they called Baranwaha. The name roughly translates to Monster King. According to scattered accounts and secondhand reports, the tribe believed the flowers were pieces of Baranwaha himself. Once a year, they would gather every bloom they could find, arrange them in a pile, and call out to him. Whatever they asked for during that ceremony was supposedly granted, but always at a terrible cost. After the ritual ended, one member of the tribe would vanish. It did not matter if they were young or old, male or female, devoted or doubtful. Someone always paid the price. The tribe was said to have once numbered in the thousands. Now only a few hundred remained. Most of this information came from neighboring groups, since the Beatrek people deliberately avoided outside contact. It was impossible to know what was true and what was just jungle folklore. You might wonder why a group of educated scientists would risk everything for a flower that could easily be a myth. The answer lies with a man named Felix Bridges. He was a well-known explorer who claimed to have seen the blue moon with his own eyes. When he returned from his journey, he published a detailed account that caused a massive stir. He wrote about following an old trail until he found a hidden passage covered in thick vines and fallen branches. He pushed through and found himself looking down at a small village. The homes were made of dried grass and woven wood. People moved through the open spaces, some working, some resting, and a large group gathered around a strange mound. From his distance, he could not make out the details, but the pile seemed to be made of flowers. The people wore blue markings on their faces, a detail that matched old descriptions of the Beatrek tribe. Felix kept watching. Without warning, everyone dropped to their knees. They stretched their hands forward and began to chant. The pile of flowers started to glow. A deep blue light pulsed from it, bright enough to cut through the jungle shadows even from where he stood. After a short while, the light faded. The tribe members scattered the petals, and from beneath them they pulled out a large wild boar. They gathered the flowers again, repeated the chant, and waited. Minutes later, the blue glow returned. When it faded once more, they reached into the pile and pulled out thick fur coats. They did it again and again. Each time, something more valuable appeared. Metal pots, silver tools, gold ornaments. Felix wrote that his rational mind completely shut down. Everything he had learned about science and logic seemed meaningless in that moment. Then, a low growl echoed from inside the flower mound. The chanting stopped instantly. Everyone stood and formed tight circles around the pile. One by one, tribe members stepped forward, paused for a moment, and then stepped back. It went on like this for nearly 10 minutes. Felix began to lose interest, thinking it was just another traditional ceremony. Then the pile lit up again, just as a young boy, maybe 10 years old, stepped forward. His parents immediately broke down, crying and reaching for him, but no one stopped them. Other tribe members lifted the boy by his arms and legs and placed him directly into the glowing mound. The flowers began to shake violently. The ground trembled. Then, with a sharp burst, the pile exploded outward. Petals flew in every direction. One of them struck Felix even though he was standing far away. When the dust settled, the boy was gone. Not a single trace of him remained. Felix was shaken, but his attention quickly shifted to the flower that had hit him. It was perfectly round, covered in soft, delicate petals, and released a scent that felt almost hypnotic. The most striking part was how it glowed. Sometimes it shone brightly like a captured firefly. Other times it dimmed to a pale, washed-out blue. He was so lost in examining it that he did not notice the tribe members had spotted him. They shouted and charged toward him with spears tipped in dark poison. He ran for his life, barely dodging through the dense undergrowth and slipping back through the hidden passage. In his panic, he dropped the flower and never saw it again. His story was met with heavy skepticism, but it was enough to spark a wave of searches for the Beatrek tribe and the Blue Moon. Nobody ever found that passage again, not even Felix. It was as if the jungle itself decided who was allowed to cross the threshold. Others claimed to have seen the flower, but they could never prove it. Some died before they could share evidence. Some lost their minds completely. Some simply disappeared. Those who survived often described an unshakable obsession with a fragrance they could not locate. They said it followed them day and night, wrapping around their thoughts until they began sniffing at ordinary objects just to find something different. Eventually, their minds fractured under the weight of it. People sometimes ask why Felix did not suffer the same fate right away. He did. After returning home, his wife developed a rare form of lung cancer and passed away. The following year, his daughter died in a car crash. He broke down. He started traveling back to the Amazon 3 or 4 times a year, desperate to find the passage and understand what he had witnessed. He never succeeded. The trips drained his savings. With nothing left to hold on to, he took his own life by swallowing a large dose of sleeping pills. When authorities found him, he was clutching a small piece of paper. On it, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "I can smell it." If I had known any of this before accepting the expedition, I would have declined immediately. I joined a team of highly respected researchers. They had won more awards collectively than I had been alive. Compared to them, I felt like an amateur. But I quickly realized I was not invited for my academic record. I was invited because I was one of the few people on Earth who could read, write, and speak the language of the Beatrix tribe. I had learned it by studying old manuscripts, faded field notes, and scattered academic papers. Looking back, I cannot explain why I became so drawn to a language I might never use. I think it started the moment I read Felix's account. The description of the ritual, the markings on the tribe members, and especially the blue moon, hooked me completely. I spent months collecting every scrap of information I could find. I read books, scanned archive documents, and cross-referenced old journals. I became, without exaggeration, the most informed outsider about the Beatrix people. And that knowledge is exactly what led me here. The first 4 days of our trip produced nothing. We were so fixated on finding the flower that we barely touched our official research goals. I could see the frustration on the faces of my teammates. They were losing patience. By the morning of the 5th day, I decided to venture further out on my own. I took a route we had not yet explored, carrying a map, a compass, a flashlight, and a satellite phone. I was not worried about getting lost or caught in the dark. After walking for about half an hour, I reached a clearing with a large cave opening beside a steady waterfall. The scenery was so peaceful that I almost forgot why I was there. I sat near the edge of the water and let the cool spray wash over me. The calm did not last. Within minutes, the sky darkened. Heavy clouds rolled in, swallowing the sunlight. Thunder cracked in the distance, and rain began to fall in thick sheets. I hurried into the cave to stay dry. The interior was much larger than it appeared from the outside. Thick spider webs covered the ceiling. Pale fungi clung to the stone walls. A large colony of bats screeched and scattered when my flashlight beam swept over them. Aside from the initial shock, the cave felt completely ordinary. It was damp, cold, and quiet, exactly what you would expect. Except for one thing. On the far wall, there was a door. It was made of old wood hanging crookedly from rusted hinges. It looked like it might collapse at any moment, but it held firm. I had no intention of touching it at first, but something about it pulled at me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange stillness of the place. I stepped forward, gripped the edge, and pushed. The wood groaned but gave way. Behind it was a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through on their hands and knees. At the far end, I could see a faint glow. Sunlight. That made no sense. It was still pouring rain outside. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. It can lead to incredible discoveries, but it can also trap you in situations you can never escape. I dropped to the ground and began crawling. The space was tight and damp. The air felt heavy. After about 5 minutes, I reached the end and pushed myself out. The light was blinding at first. I covered my eyes with my hand and waited for them to adjust. When I finally looked around, my breath caught. The sky was clear and bright. The ground was completely dry. The air was warm. Rain clouds did not exist here. I was standing at the edge of a small village. The houses were built from dried grass and woven wood. People moved through the open paths, going about their daily routines. Children played in the dirt. Women swept the fronts of their homes. Men walked with a slight forward lean, carrying long wooden spears. Then it hit me. The posture. The weapons, the blue paint on their faces. I was looking directly at the Beatrix tribe. I stood completely frozen. I could not move. I could not speak. I just stared. That stillness is what gave me away. Someone shouted, then another. Within seconds, the entire village turned toward me. People began to run, raising their spears, their voices sharp and urgent. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like stone. They were closing in fast. Instinct finally broke through the shock. I turned and tried to sprint, but my foot caught on a root. I fell hard onto the packed earth. I could hear them approaching. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressed my hands over my face, and spoke the first words I could remember in their language. I told them I was a researcher. I told them I only wanted to learn about Baron Waha and the Blue Moon. I begged them not to hurt me. I promised to leave immediately and never speak of this place. I waited for the strike. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The shouting stopped. The air grew heavy with silence. I kept my eyes closed, heart pounding, unsure if they had changed their minds or if they were just waiting for me to lower my guard. Finally, I slowly opened my eyes. A tall man stood directly in front of me. His build was strong, his posture relaxed. He held out his hand, palm up, and offered a calm, steady smile. I hesitated, but I could not afford to offend him. I took his hand and pulled myself up. What happened next confused me completely. The tribe treated me like an honored guest. 2 or 3 people walked with me wherever I went. They showed me their homes, their storage areas, their gathering spaces. Everyone spoke kindly. Everyone smiled. It felt unreal. At mealtime, I was led to a long wooden table that could easily seat hundreds. The tribe members ate together, but my portion was completely different. I was served a perfectly cooked steak, smoked pork, a fresh vegetable salad with lime, and a glass of juice that tasted like it had been pressed minutes before. If I had been handed this meal at a high-end restaurant, I would have considered it flawless. For a community completely cut off from modern trade, it made no sense at all. After eating, I was taken to a large building called Ani Melasu Plau, which roughly translates to the resting place. The same man who had helped me up greeted me at the door. He was the tribal chief. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and respectful. After spending some time speaking with him, I gathered my courage and asked my question. I wanted to know about Baron Waha and the Blue Moon. I expected anger. I expected silence. Instead, he smiled and agreed to answer. We stepped outside and found a quiet storage hut near the main building. We sat on the outer porch and began to talk. I will share his answers as clearly as I can. I asked about the history of the tribe and why they remained so hidden. He explained that the Beatrek people once numbered over 5,000. They were self-sufficient and content. Then a sudden illness swept through the village. People died in their sleep. Within 2 years, the population dropped below 1,000. They were terrified of complete extinction. Then Baron Waha appeared. He saved them. When the world ignored their suffering, he reached out and pulled them back from the edge. The chief called him a demon, but also called him a god. He said Baron Waha was cruel by nature, but everything he did was for the survival of his people. He compared him to a parent who would do anything to protect their children. I pointed out the contradiction. If he was truly evil and manipulative, why worship him at all? The chief laughed. It was not a light or friendly laugh. It was sharp, uncontrolled, and almost unhinged. When he finally calmed himself, he apologized and explained that the name Monster King was nothing more than a rumor. They had created it themselves. They had spread it intentionally. It was part of a larger design. I asked what design. He turned the question back to me. He asked what the main goal of any dark entity truly is. I said, conquest, corruption, the destruction of good. He nodded, but corrected me. He said the real goal is simpler. It is about making people lose trust in light and faith in goodness. It is about pushing them until they are so broken that they willingly turn to the dark. When people begin to worship a destructive force as a savior, then evil has already won. He paused after that. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that was exactly what he had described. But the intensity in his eyes made me stay quiet. I asked him to explain the plan. He told me that immediately after saving them from extinction, Baron Waha laid out a strategy. It began with spreading rumors. It ended with me. He said his lord wanted the tribe to reclaim their place in a world that had forgotten them. He said modern society would fall, and nothing could stop it anymore. He said everything I had done, everything that had happened since Felix Bridges first crossed into their land, was carefully arranged. Felix was allowed to escape. The tribe could have caught him easily. Their hunters move faster than predators. Their spears never miss. He ran because they let him run. They needed him to tell the world about the ritual and the flower. They needed the curiosity to spread. They needed researchers, explorers, and dreamers to come searching. And I was the final step. The chief explained that Baron Waha does not mean Monster King. It means the one who travels through scent. The entity lives inside the flowers, specifically within their fragrance. When someone inhales the scent, it enters the mind. It begins to reshape thoughts. The more a person fights it, the stronger the smell becomes. Eventually, the person either accepts the change or breaks completely. He told me I was not special. I was not chosen because of my knowledge or my skills. I was simply the next available piece. If they had chosen someone else, the result would have been identical. I was just an unlucky winner of a dark lottery. Before I could respond, he lifted a small bowl filled with thick, gray smoke. He blew it directly into my face. The scent was overwhelming. It was sweet, heavy, and instantly intoxicating. I coughed, gasped, and tried to stand, but my vision blurred. My legs gave out. Everything went dark. When I woke, I was back in the cave. Rain had stopped. Evening light filtered through the opening. I sat up quickly, heart racing, wondering if it had all been a dream. I looked at the far wall. The wooden door was gone. Only solid stone remained. I let out a shaky breath. It had to be a hallucination. I leaned back, resting my hands on the ground. My fingers pressed against something soft. I looked down. Resting in my palm was a perfect round bloom, turquoise blue petals, faint, shifting glow, a rich, hypnotic fragrance rising from it. I knew exactly what it was. I threw it away, covered my mouth, and scrambled backward. That was when I realized I had been sitting on a massive pile of them. Hundreds, maybe thousands. My mind went blank. I ran. I sprinted out of the cave and into the tree line. Then, everything cut out. After that, my memory returned in fragments. Bright flashes, short bursts of clarity separated by long stretches of blackness. When my mind finally stabilized, the first thing I heard was screaming. Women stood nearby, pointing at me with terrified expressions. I looked down. I was holding a knife. It was soaked in blood. Beside me lay a body. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry and my strength completely drained. I could not form words. The police arrived quickly. They took me to the station. I spent 2 nights in a holding cell before facing a judge. I told them everything. I explained the tribe, the flower, the smoke, the manipulation, the plan to spread control through scent. They listened quietly. Then they smiled. The judge questioned my mental state. The prosecution argued I had completely lost touch with reality. My own lawyer used that to plead insanity. It is rarely accepted. But the judge made an exception. I was sent to a psychiatric facility for an indefinite stay. They said I would remain until I was deemed stable. Inside the facility, I slowly learned 2 things from the television in the common room. First, I had supposedly guided my team to the cave where the flowers were stored. My discovery was praised as a major scientific breakthrough. Second, at the celebration party, I had allegedly grabbed a knife from the food table and attacked a colleague, stabbing him repeatedly until he died. I watched the report in disbelief. I shouted at the screen, telling anyone who would listen that it was all part of the design, that I had been used, that I never chose this. They sedated me. That became a pattern. Every time I tried to explain, they increased my medication. Years passed. I told my story to nurses, doctors, guards, other patients. Nobody believed me. They always gave the same gentle, dismissive response. Everything will be fine. Do not worry. Nothing improved. My stay never ended. Over time, the confusion began to clear. I started connecting the pieces. I realized I had been asking the wrong question. It was never why me, it was why not me. I was not essential to the plan. I was replaceable. They did not need my expertise. They only needed someone willing to step forward, someone who could be guided, someone whose subconscious could be triggered and directed. The smoke had done exactly that. It likely contained a powerful psychoactive compound. It knocked me out, bypassed my conscious mind, and planted commands that my body followed without resistance. I led the team to the cave because I was told to. I attacked my colleague because I was told to. My conscious self was locked away while my subconscious carried out the orders. It is just my best guess. The truth might be even darker, but it is the only explanation that fits. I am writing this now with a strange sense of calm. I do not admire what was done. I condemn it completely. But I cannot ignore the precision of it. The planning, the patience, the psychological manipulation, the use of scent as a control mechanism. It was terrifyingly effective. If you are reading this and you believe even a fraction of what I have written, I am sorry. I am sorry for my part in it. I did not act willingly. I did not choose to help them, but I was the instrument. That fact has eaten away at me for years. It has stolen my sleep, my appetite, my peace. Once I finally understood the full picture, I knew I had to wait until I could write it all down. Now that it is finished, I can stop fighting. I can let go. I want to apologize one last time. I apologize for my pride in learning a forgotten language. I apologize for my arrogance in thinking that demons and ancient evils were only stories. They are real. They do not need horns or fire. They only need patience and a way in. I hope that good still has a chance. I hope that light does not fade completely. If it does, I am deeply sorry for leaving you to face it without me. Goodbye, and good luck. News update. Tony Brandon, lead researcher on the Blue Moon expedition and former academic, was found dead in his facility room. Authorities confirmed he used a shard of glass to cut his throat. He had been institutionalized for several years following the fatal attack on a fellow team member during a post-expedition celebration. The insanity defense was accepted by the court. In related coverage, the blue moon flower, long considered one of the rarest botanical discoveries in modern history, will finally reach commercial markets. After being harvested in large quantities 5 years ago and acquired by a major French fragrance company, the blooms have been processed into a new scent called Parfum Blue Moon. The release was delayed due to production complications and unexplained incidents involving early testers, but those issues have now been resolved. The perfume will launch globally next week at $30 per bottle. Pre-orders have already exceeded 25,000 in the first 48 hours. Consumers are expected to finally experience the rich, captivating, and deeply intoxicating fragrance of the long, elusive blue moon. Story 5. I have worked for the Department of Wildlife Conservation in my country for many years now. Most days, the hardest part of the job is dealing with other people. Lately, we have seen more poachers than ever before, which makes every patrol feel a little more tense. I do not usually see many of them in my section, though. The elephants left this area back in the late 90s, mostly because of those cruel hunters. Now, the poachers who do come through are usually after buffalo or deer, targeting them for their horns. It is a sad reality, but it is the one I have learned to live with. A little over a week ago, I was on patrol with another ranger. To keep his identity private, I will call him Malik. I was walking along a small foothill scanning the tree line while Malik stayed back near the pickup truck talking to his wife on the radio. That was when the smell reached me. It was sharp and heavy, like iron mixed with decay. Something had died nearby, and not long ago, I followed the scent down the slope, and that was when I saw it. I have found many kills in my time on this job. It comes with the territory. But this one was different. It was a male buffalo, easily 600 kilograms when it was alive. What remained of it looked relatively fresh, probably no more than a day old. since no scavengers had touched it yet. It had been fed on, though. The belly was torn open, and the internal organs and parts of the head were gone. But here is what did not make sense. The thick meat on the flanks, the legs, and the belly, the parts that any large predator would go for first, were left completely untouched. The buffalo's left legs were damaged at the ankle, the kind of injury you see when a heavy animal falls on a steep slope. The right side had 5 deep, jagged slashes, as if something had raked its claws across the animal while knocking it down. But that was impossible. The largest predator in this country does not have the strength to bring down something that heavy. When Malik finally came down the hill to check on me, he saw the kill too. He was just as confused as I was. Then he pointed out something I had missed. Along with most of the scalp, the buffalo's horns were also gone. I took several photos and marked the exact location. When we returned to the northern entrance of the reserve, where our main offices and living quarters are, I filed a report. I listed the kill as possibly the work of a leopard or a poacher, and I attached the photos as evidence. But deep down, I knew it was neither. Leopards have no use for horns. Poachers would not leave behind the valuable meat and organs, and neither of them could have tipped over half a ton of muscle and bone. I spent that evening looking through species profiles and activity maps, but I found nothing that fit. It had to be a person, I told myself. Someone using a trap to bring the buffalo down, then making claw marks to throw us off. The thought of someone harming these animals for profit always made my blood boil. And that was where I left it for a while. I went home on Saturday, spent time with my parents and cousins, and came back to work on Sunday. The strange kill had almost slipped my mind. Almost. The next day, I was on patrol again. Malik had used his vacation days to take his family to the beach, which was fine, except now I was doing my rounds alone. It was around midday when I saw it. Hanging from the branches of a large banyan tree, shiny and white, was something that stood out sharply against the thick green and brown of the forest canopy. I stopped the truck and got out. The walk up to the tree was uphill, but not too hard, since the undergrowth was sparse in that area. When I finally reached it, it took me a few seconds to understand what I was looking at. It was a large pair of horns, definitely from a buffalo. The surface was smooth, clean, and polished like fine ivory. I took more pictures. I filed another report, and once again, I heard nothing back from management. Finding those horns lit a fire in me. At this point, I was sure a person was behind this. Maybe they had used a trap to bring the buffalo down, then added those claw-like marks to make it look like a leopard attack. I was not entirely sure about the details, but I knew with complete certainty that no animal could have done this. So I requested permission to spend the next night in one of the small field observation huts in that area. All I needed to do was prove that people were active there. Then the police could get involved and handle the rest. That part of the reserve rarely sees night patrols. It is far inland, and the terrain is steep and rough. A senior officer once told me, a poacher could not get in without passing another ranger's patrol first, and even if they did, they would be more likely to get struck by lightning than to escape with anything valuable. So it was no surprise when I found the hut slightly overgrown with vines on the outside and covered in dust on the inside. The layout was simple and small. 3 of the 4 walls had large windows with metal bars to keep animals out. The 4th wall was solid concrete with the door set into it. Inside there was a desk, a chair, and the ever-present bucket. I set down the things I had brought in the corner near the door. Just the basics for a night like this. My issued rifle and ammunition, a utility knife, a high-powered flashlight, my radio, and a bag of trail mix with a large bottle of water. I went on 3 patrols that night. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except maybe the sambar deer. Sambar, like most prey animals, sleep in short bursts and rest more often at night. The herd I saw from my patrol was all awake, standing close together, twitching at every small sound. I watched them for a while, but nothing revealed itself. Whatever was making them nervous was not there, at least not that night. It was around 2 in the morning when I heard it. A sudden rush of movement, chaotic and uneven, exactly the sound a herd makes when something charges at them. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight right away and called in the sound over the radio. By the time I reached the area, the noise had stopped. The woods were quiet, but not in the usual way. It was not the quiet that comes right before a predator strikes. It was not the peaceful silence the night sometimes brings. This was different. It was total, absolute stillness. Not even the wind moved the leaves. It was as if the entire forest had been muted. I made my way back to the clearing where I first saw the sambar. The herd was gone. All except one. It was a male deer lying on the ground. It had been opened up, scalped, and emptied, just like the buffalo. The body was still warm. It could not have been dead for more than 20 minutes. But this time, the killing method was different. Long puncture wounds carved deep channels into the neck, each about a quarter as deep as the neck was wide. And there were 5 claw marks this time, spread out like the tracks of a raccoon. I did not even know what I was looking at anymore. I have years of training and experience in this job, but this made no sense. All I knew was that I did not want to be near that body, especially while it was still warm. I was on a trail halfway back to the hut when I heard the canopy rustle above me. It was not the light, quick sound of a monkey moving. This was heavier, more deliberate. I turned toward the noise. Even with my high-powered flashlight, the distance and the morning fog rolling in made it hard to see clearly. But I could make out a large silhouette up in the branches, and I saw the light catch its eyes, reflecting back as 2 glowing green spots. I froze. For a moment, we just looked at each other. That moment broke quickly. My survival instinct finally kicked in, and I ran. My flashlight fell from my hand and clattered against the ground. The rustling did not follow me. As I rushed back, I tripped over a rock and twisted my ankle, but the adrenaline kept me from feeling the pain. I just kept moving. Eventually, I made it back up to the hut. When I arrived, I was greeted by the familiar flash of headlights and a junior officer who looked both concerned and confused. He would not have believed me if I told him what I saw. But honestly, who would? It has been a week since that night. The Department of Wildlife Conservation has put me on paid leave while my ankle heals. But I asked Malik to do me a favor. I asked him to go check that banyan tree again. Yesterday, he called me. He said there is a new pair of horns hanging from the branches now. Polished, clean, and this time they are sambar antlers. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I saw that night. I have gone over every detail in my head, again and again. The smell of iron and rot. The buffalo torn open but with the best meat left behind. The horns missing, then found hanging like trophies. The sambar herd, acting nervous, then gone, except for one. The deep puncture wounds, the 5 claw marks, the silhouette in the trees, the green eyes reflecting my light. None of it fits any animal I know. None of it fits any poacher I have ever heard of. And the silence that followed, that heavy, unnatural quiet, it was not the silence of an empty forest. It was the silence of something holding its breath, of something watching. I used to believe I understood the balance of this place, predator and prey, life and death, the circle that keeps the wild moving. But what I saw does not belong to that circle. It feels like something else, something that does not hunt to eat, something that takes what it wants, not for survival, but for some other reason. A reason I cannot name, the polished horns. That detail stays with me. Animals do not polish bones. Poachers might clean horns to sell, but they would not leave the rest of the animal behind. And they would not hang them in a tree like decorations. It feels intentional, like a message, or a warning. I have tried to report what I saw in my own words to people who might listen, but the responses are always the same, polite, dismissive. They suggest stress, fatigue, the mind playing tricks in the dark. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am wrong. But I know what I felt in that moment. Standing in that clearing, looking up at those glowing eyes, it was not fear of an animal. It was fear of something that understands us, something that knows how we think, something that is playing a game we do not even know the rules to. My ankle is healing. The leave will end soon. I will go back to work. I will patrol the same trails. I will watch the same trees. But I will not be the same. I will listen for sounds that do not belong. I will watch for shadows that move wrong. And I will wonder every time I see a banyan tree if something new is hanging from its branches, waiting, polished, clean, a trophy, a warning, a promise. I do not know what is out there. I do not know what it wants, but I know it is still there. And I know now that it knows I saw it. That changes everything. It changes the way I walk through the forest, the way I hold my rifle, the way I listen to the night. Because now I am not just watching for poachers. I am watching for something else, something that does not leave tracks, something that does not make noise, something that takes what it wants and leaves behind only questions. And those polished horns, they are not just trophies, they are markers, signs that whatever is doing this is not done, that it is still choosing, still taking, still hanging its prizes where someone might find them, where I might find them. Maybe it wants me to see, maybe it wants me to understand, or maybe it just does not care if I do. I used to think the worst thing I would face on patrol was another person, a poacher with a gun and a greedy heart. I was wrong. The worst thing is not knowing what you are up against, not knowing its rules, not knowing its endgame. The worst thing is the silence after the scream, the stillness after the rush, the empty clearing where a herd once stood, and the quiet, patient certainty that whatever did that is still out there, watching, waiting, choosing its next moment. I will go back. I have to. This is my job. This is my place. But I will go back with new eyes, and I will listen, not just with my ears, but with my whole self. Because now I know the forest is not just full of life and death. It is full of secrets. And some of those secrets do not want to be found. Some of them want to find you instead.